The old St. Vincent Hospital loomed like a forgotten relic on the outskirts of town. It had been decommissioned years ago, its peeling walls and broken windows a testament of decades of neglect. But with the new city redevelopment plans, someone had to inventory and secure the place before it was torn down. That someone turned out to be Jake, Kyra, and Lewis, three underpaid temps who didn't take their jobs too seriously. On their first night shift, Jake pulled a joint from his pocket as they sat in Lewis's old car in the hospital's crumbling parking lot. "We're gonna be here until sunrise," Jake said, lighting up. "Might as well make it interesting." Kyra rolled her eyes, but took a hit anyways, followed by Lewis coughing violently. The weed hit fast, mellowing their nerves but heightening their senses. As they approached the hospital, the towering building seemed even more ominous, its broken windows staring like hollow eyes. 10 p.m. The trio entered through the main door, their flashlights slicing through the suffocating darkness. The building smelled of mildew and antiseptic, a stale reminder of its one bustling halls. "All right," Kyra said, consulting a clipboard. "We're supposed to check every floor, make sure nothing's been stolen or vandalized, and log any anomalies." She used air quotes. "Define anomalies," Jake joked, his voice echoing down the empty corridor. "Probably rats or busted pipes," Lewis said, shivering. "Let's get this over with." The floor was uneventful. Empty rooms with overturned beds, scattered medical supplies, and graffiti on the walls. But the deeper they ventured, the more their buzz began to shift into unease. The sound of their footsteps echoed unnaturally, sometimes doubling back as if someone else was walking with them. 11 p.m. On the second floor, Kyra froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Jake and Lewis stopped, straining to listen. Faintly, from somewhere down the hall, came the sound of a baby crying. "Hell no," Lewis muttered, gripping his flashlight tighter. "It's just the wind or something," Jake said, though his voice wavered. "This place is old as hell." But as they moved towards the sound, it stopped abruptly. They entered a room labeled maternity ward, only to find it empty. The cribs were overturned. The walls were covered in faded, childlike drawings. As Kyra shined her flashlight over one of the cribs, she gasped. It was filled with dusty, crumpled baby blankets and something small that moved. She stepped closer and saw a rat scurry out. "Jesus," she muttered, her heart racing. Jake laughed nervously. "See? It's just a rat." But none of them noticed the faint imprints of tiny handprints forming in the dust on the crib's edges. 12 a.m. They made their way to the third floor, where the surgery rooms were located. The air was colder here, and every breath clouded in front of them. As they walked, Lewis suddenly stopped. "Someone's there," he hissed, pointing down the hallway. In the beam of his flashlight, a figure stood at the end of the corridor. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its head tilted at an odd angle. "Hello?" Kyra called out, her voice shaking. The figure didn't move. Jake took a step forward. Probably just some squatter. But as he spoke, the figure melted into the shadows, dissolving as if it had never been there. "Nope, nope, nope," Lewis muttered, turning his head back to the stairs. "Wait," Kyra grabbed his arm. "We still have to check the floor." Reluctant, they passed on, but the air grew heavier and silence oppressive. 1 a.m. They reached the surgery wing with their flashlights casting long, jittery shadows across the tiled walls. The overhead lights were dead. The metallic scent of rust hung thick in the air. "Let's just check the rooms and get out of here," Kyra said through her voice trembling. They entered the first operating room. Old surgery tools lay scattered on the floor. An overturned gurney stood in the center. Lewis approached the gurney, running his flashlight over it. "Guys," he said, swallowing hard. "There's blood on this thing." Kyra frowned. "That's impossible. This place has been shut down for years." Jake leaned in for a closer look. The blood wasn't dry. It was glistening under the beam of the flashlight, fresh and sticky. "All right, that's messed up," Jake said, stepping back. Suddenly, a loud metallic clank echoed through the room. All three of them jumped, their flashlights darting towards the source. A scalpel had fallen from the surgical tray, spinning on the floor before coming to a stop. "Nope," Lewis said, backing towards the door. "We're done. Screw this shit." But as they turned to leave, the gurney creaked, and a low guttural moan filled the room. They froze, staring as the gurney's wheels began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it hurled towards them. Run! Kyra screamed, and they bolted from the room, the gurney crashing into the wall behind them. 2 a.m. On the fourth floor, the air was so cold that frost coated the windows. The trio huddled together, their nerves frailed. We should just go, Lewis whispered. We can't, Kyra said. We have to clock out or we don't get paid. Jake snorted. Yeah, great. Minimum wage to die in a haunted hospital. As they walked, Lewis shined his flashlight down another hallway and stopped dead in his tracks. Guys, he whispered, his voice trembling. Look, at the end of the corridor, a shadow moved, not casted by any of their light, but something independent, crawling along the walls like ink spreading across paper. The shadows stretched and twisted, forming the shape of a figure. It had elongated limbs and no face, but it was watching them. What the hell is that? Jake asked, his voice breaking. The shadow began to move towards them, its limbs unnaturally jerky as it closed the distance. Run! Kyra shouted. They sprinted down the hallway, the shadow following, the movements growing more erratic. They bursted into a stairwell and slammed the door behind them, but the shadows seeped under the cracks, reforming on the walls. Downstairs now, Jake yelled. They barreled down the stairs. 3 a.m. The trio reached the first floor, panting and shaking. For a moment, they thought they were safe. Then, the voices began. At first, they were faint, whispers that seemed to come from the walls, but soon they grew louder, overlapping and echoing.
Help me. Why are you here? Run while you can.
Kyra clamped her hands over her ears. Make it stop. Lewis pointed towards the exit. Let's get out of here. But as they ran towards the front door, they slammed shut with a deafening boom. The whispers turned into laughter, cold, mocking, and everywhere at once. 4 a.m. Desperate to find another way out, they stumbled into the basement where the morgue was located. Why did we come down here? Lewis hissed. This is the worst place to be. We didn't have a choice, Kyra snapped, her flashlight flickering. The basement was even darker than the floor above, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. As they passed rows of steel drawers, the sound of metal scraping against metal filled the room. One of the drawers slid open on its own, revealing an empty slab. Then another opened, and another. Let's get out of here, Jake yelled. But before they could have a move, a hand, pale and skeletal, emerged from one of the drawers, followed by another. One by one, figures began to crawl out of the morgue's drawers, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Lewis screamed as one of the figures lunged at him, and they all bolted for the stairs. 5 a.m. The hospital seemed alive now, groaning and creaking as if it were shifting around them. Doors slammed, lights flickered, and the air was filled with whispers and laughter. As they ran, the shadows reappeared, blocking their path behind them. Skeletal figures from the morgue were closing in. This way, Kyra shouted, leading them through a side hallway. But the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the exit always just out of reach. Can't do this anymore, cried Lewis, falling to his knees. Jake and Kyra grabbed him, dragging him forward as the shadows loomed closer. 6 a.m. Just as the figures closed in and the shadows reached for them, the first rays of sunlight broke through the hospital's windows. The whispers stopped. The shadows dissolved into nothing. The skeletal figures froze and crumbled to dust. The trio stumbled out of the hospital, collapsing onto the cold asphalt of the parking lot. We're never doing this again, Jake said, his voice shaking. As they turned to look back at the hospital, they saw something in the windows. A figure, watching them. Its face obscured. The door slammed shut behind them, and the building fell silent once more.